She arrived with a soft smile and a bouquet of flowers in one hand, a folded speech in the other. Her words were warm, her tone calm, and her mission clear, at least on the surface. She said she had come to support African women. She visited villages, hugged babies, handed out books, and praised President Ibrahim Traoré on national television. But behind the public kindness was a private purpose, one that had nothing to do with helping anyone. When the truth surfaced, she didn't just lose her reputation or her so-called charity. She broke down in front of the world as her deception unraveled in real time. Her name was Claire Dubois, a blonde woman in her early 30s with a polished French accent and expensive sunglasses. She introduced herself as the director of an international NGO called Hope Forward, claiming their work focused on girls' education and women's health. She appeared on talk shows, gave speeches at community centers, and made statements about empowering the next generation of African women. She told the press, "This is not about politics. It's about people." But she wasn't based in Burkina Faso. Her office was actually in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. Her schedule didn't follow community development patterns, it followed something far more strategic. While she toured rural areas by day, her nights were filled with encrypted messages and silent phone calls to unnamed recipients. She traveled with a man she called her media officer, a tall, quiet figure who never gave his name. Claire carried 2 phones, one public, and another used only in private and never registered locally. Her questions raised eyebrows. She asked villagers, "How far is the nearest military base? How often do soldiers rotate shifts? Has Burkina Faso received drone support recently?" At first, her behavior was brushed off. She was polite, fluent in French, and gave away generous donations. But to some, it didn't sit right. In one village, an old woman whispered to a local official, "She's not here to help us. She's looking for something." What Claire didn't know was that she was already being watched. Burkinabe intelligence had quietly flagged her the week she landed. They had been monitoring Hope Forward and knew its funding was tied to a Western foundation involved in defense analytics. They traced her emails to a French IP address and noted her frequent use of code names in digital correspondence, phrases like phase orange and tax zone. President Traoré was informed. But he said only one thing: let her work. The more she thinks she's winning, the more her mission will reveal itself. And she did think she was winning. She smiled for every photo op, posed with schoolgirls holding signs that read, "Africa First, Women Always," and took pride in her growing media presence. She was praised for donating solar lamps and sanitary products. But her visits followed a disturbing pattern. Over 3 weeks, Claire had visited 9 villages, all located near sensitive zones, drone towers, oil fields, or military training grounds. She claimed it was coincidence. But her laptop, already compromised by Burkinabe surveillance, showed otherwise. One night, in her hotel room in Ouagadougou, she opened her laptop and began working on a digital map. Red circles marked key locations across the country. She named the file BF Field Access V2. These circles weren't schools or clinics. They were military supply routes, surveillance posts, and command centers. She attached the map to an encrypted email address to a contact saved under the name Melvin. The server? Not in Paris. Not in Washington. It was linked to a NATO-affiliated data center in Abidjan. She hit send. She smiled. She thought she had succeeded. But every keystroke she made, every file she opened, had already been cloned. The Burkinabe cyber team had mirrored her device in real time. The moment she clicked send, President Traoré received the entire email, complete with the map and metadata. He reviewed it in silence, confirmed the target locations, and placed a secure call to his intelligence team. "Let her continue," he said. "She's giving us more than we could ask for." The next morning, Claire held a breakfast meeting with foreign journalists. She wore a bright white outfit and gave another uplifting statement. Burkina Faso is a rising hope in this region, she said confidently. But that very day, the president's security team uncovered a USB drive hidden inside a fake lipstick tube in her handbag. Inside it were satellite images, drone logs, and surveillance photos of government convoys. The time for subtlety was over. Yet Traoré didn't want a quiet arrest. He wanted the world to see the truth for itself. Rather than move quietly, President Traoré chose a different path. He sent Claire Dubois a formal, elegant invitation. She was asked to speak as a guest of honor at the upcoming National Conference on African Sovereignty, a high-profile gathering meant to showcase Africa's emerging voice in global affairs. Claire accepted with pride, unaware that the invitation wasn't a reward, it was a carefully staged reckoning. Confident and glowing from weeks of praise, she arrived at the event dressed in a vibrant African print dress, smiling like a beloved figure. Cameras clicked. Journalists swarmed. The red carpet stretched before her as she waved to the crowd like a rising star. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, hundreds of attendees filled the seats, government officials, foreign diplomats, students, military leaders, and media. At the top of the stage hung a massive banner, African Sovereignty, Our Voice, Our Future. Claire was scheduled to speak during the final panel, a session titled How Foreign Partnerships Empower Africa. She had written her speech with care, choosing words like collaboration, transparency, and shared destiny. She rehearsed backstage, sipping tea, unaware that her speech would never reach its conclusion. President Traoré arrived without an entourage or announcement. He simply entered the hall during the middle of a panel and took a seat in the third row, nodding politely to those who noticed him. Claire did. She smiled. She had praised him often in interviews, calling him a bold, modern African leader. His presence, she thought, only validated her mission. When her name was called, Claire walked to the podium with full composure. Burkina Faso, she began, is a shining light of possibility. I have walked your villages, spoken with your women, seen your hope. The audience clapped softly. She continued, we, the global community, are not here to direct, we are here to serve. We are your friends. Just then, President Traoré rose from his seat and approached the front of the stage. The room turned to him. The moderator instinctively stepped aside. Traoré stood next to Claire and spoke gently. Madam Claire, he said, you speak of trust. May we trust you enough to ask a few questions, live, here, among friends? Claire's smile froze. Of course, she replied, laughing nervously, trying to maintain poise. But the applause had stopped. The lights felt hotter. The air changed. Behind her, the large screen that had displayed conference banners now flickered to a new image, a file titled BF, Field, Access, v2.pdf. It was her map. Her eyes widened as red circles and coded labels filled the screen. Each mark corresponded to sensitive military and logistical sites she had visited, not once but systematically. The audience sat in stunned silence. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He simply turned and asked, do you recognize this? Claire stammered. I'm not sure what this is. Traoré said nothing. The screen changed again. This time, it displayed an email. The sender, claire.dubois@hopeforward.org. Subject, Phase Orange, Tracking COM Vehicles. Body, BF West Routes Exposed. Minimal resistance from volunteers. Use school visits for visual confirmation. Mission continues. Gasps filled the hall. Even the foreign diplomats looked stunned. One local journalist stood and shouted, she was using women and children to map our army. Claire's hands began to shake. It's not what it looks like, she said quickly. These were notes, for fundraising purposes. Traoré looked at her and asked simply, fundraising? He turned back to the crowd. We cloned her devices. Every file, every message, every contact. The instructions were sent from Abidjan to a NATO-linked office under the name Cultural Research Desk. She said she came to help our women. But she came to map our defenses. Then came the final blow. From Claire's bag, security had extracted a hidden USB drive, disguised as a lipstick tube. Inside were high-resolution satellite images, detailed convoy schedules, and drone surveillance paths over restricted zones. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and very public. Claire's tears came slowly at first, then uncontrollably. She looked to Traoré. "Please, can we talk in private? Not like this." But he didn't respond. Two plainclothes security officers stepped calmly onto the stage. They didn't touch her. They didn't threaten. They simply stood at her side. Traoré turned to the audience and said, "They send soft faces now. Clean hands. Gentle names. But the plan beneath is always the same." The room remained still as Claire, once seen as a hero, stepped down the stage in silence, flanked by quiet justice and watched by the very people she had claimed to help. By dawn, the entire continent had seen the footage. Claire Dubois, once paraded as a compassionate humanitarian, was now infamous, a foreign operative exposed in real time. Clips of her standing frozen on stage, the damning map behind her, circulated across every major platform. TikTok was filled with voiceovers of her speech abruptly cut by Traoré's quiet intervention. Twitter threads unpacked the timeline, breaking down how her carefully crafted presence had unraveled under a floodlight of truth. WhatsApp groups shared screenshots of her email, highlighting the words "minimal resistance" and "mission continues" in disbelief. International media scrambled to catch up. Headlines flooded in: NGO director or espionage agent? Burkina Faso president unmasks Western operative, when aid becomes intrusion. French outlets were more cautious. A Paris-based paper called it a misunderstanding. An American NGO defended her actions as routine field data collection. But none could explain the lipstick USB drive filled with military intelligence. None could deny the authenticity of her emails. And no one could explain why an NGO dedicated to women's health needed detailed photos of drone launch sites. In Burkina Faso, however, the response was unified. People didn't just talk about the spy. They talked about the method, how she was exposed without force, without spectacle, without a single insult. A quiet unveiling. Calm. Controlled. Surgical. The betrayal had been answered with dignity and precision. In marketplaces, people watched the video instead of football. On radios, commentators replayed Traoré's words, "They send soft faces now." A grandmother in the north told her grandchildren, "This is what happens when you look past the smiles and listen for the silence." Inside the secure facility outside Ouagadougou, Claire Dubois was no longer the composed woman in sunglasses giving speeches. She was a detainee with no press badge, no camera crew, no carefully planned remarks. For 3 days, she remained silent. No public statement. No apology. Her embassy had sent a quiet request for dialogue. The Burkinabe government had not responded. But elsewhere, the nation had already moved forward. At the University of Ouagadougou, students organized an event titled "They Used to Send Soldiers, Now They Send Smiles." Murals were painted on walls, portraying Claire with a cracked mask over her face, a camera in one hand and military documents falling from the other. One student read a poem to a packed auditorium. She came in silk and silence / left in shame and storm / said she was our sister / but drew maps of where we sleep. Then, unannounced, President Traoré walked into the hall. No entourage. No cameras. He walked to the front and spoke plainly. "They used to come with guns," he said. "Now they come with cameras. They used to wear uniforms. Now they wear scarves and speak of kindness. But if they come to break us, they will leave exposed. The students stood in thunderous applause. But Traoré wasn't finished. He pointed to a projector screen, where a single sentence appeared in bold white letters. The next one they send will be received the same way, calmly, watched, and unforgiven. The quote spread faster than anything Claire had said in her weeks of travel. It appeared as graffiti in Niamey. It was printed on T-shirts in Bamako. TikTokers across the region ended their videos with the phrase. It became more than a warning. It became a line in the sand. As for Claire, diplomatic negotiations began behind closed doors. Eventually, she was released, not with celebration, but with a lifelong ban from Burkina Faso and all Sahel Alliance nations. Her visa privileges were revoked, her organization was deregistered, and her name was recorded in the country's national security database. She returned to France with no public farewell. The media back home tried to recast her as misunderstood, but the footage told another story. No amount of PR spin could erase the look on her face as the projector screen revealed her map. No diplomatic phrase could rewrite the line she had drawn between aid and agenda, or the boundary she had crossed. Claire Dubois came to tell a story. But in the end, she became one. Claire's fall wasn't just a scandal. It was a turning point. In cities and villages across West Africa, people spoke not only about her exposure but about what it symbolized. For decades, foreign aid workers, journalists, and diplomats had walked the continent with polite smiles and hidden motives. This time, one of them had been caught, not with noise, but with undeniable clarity. And it changed something. Not just in Burkina Faso, but across borders. In café conversations, in classroom debates, and on street murals, the message was the same: we are no longer blind. President Traoré never gloated. He issued no victory speech, held no parade. Instead, he chose restraint, letting the facts continue to speak. When the French ambassador in Ouagadougou formally requested a private meeting to resolve the matter diplomatically, the president declined. He instead held a short press briefing at the National Press Center. No teleprompter. No flourish. Just a few quiet words. They ask us to forgive, he said. They ask us to forget. But they never ask themselves what we feel when their operatives sit in our homes, shake our hands, and send our secrets across oceans. If their missions are honest, why are their methods so hidden? In the room were mothers and teachers from the very communities Claire had visited. One woman stood up and spoke with a trembling voice. "Mr. President, thank you for protecting our trust." Her words drew quiet applause, not loud or forced, but genuine, the sound of people finally feeling heard. Meanwhile, in Europe and the US, analysts scrambled to reframe the story. Some claimed Claire had been naive. Others suggested she had been used by larger forces. But not one of them could explain the encrypted emails. Not one could deny the military maps. And no one had an answer for why a charity director needed a lipstick tube USB filled with high-resolution surveillance data. Inside her holding room outside the capital, Claire sat quietly. The media storm raged outside, but there were no cameras on her anymore. No microphones. Just a concrete wall, a closed laptop, and the realization that everything she had built her cover around had collapsed. Her silence continued. There was no statement because there was no defense. 3 weeks later, Claire was officially expelled from the country. No press conference. No staged release. She was escorted to a secure airport gate under diplomatic watch and placed on a return flight to Paris. Her passport was flagged. Her name blacklisted across a dozen West African nations. She didn't look back. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. The woman who once stood on a red carpet in traditional print now left without ceremony, a symbol of what had been exposed. But Burkina Faso didn't dwell. It turned forward. In the following months, new guidelines were introduced for foreign NGOs operating in sensitive zones. National media launched a campaign called Transparency is Protection, featuring posters, interviews, and local training programs on media literacy and foreign interference. University curriculums were updated. Young people were encouraged not to reject all international cooperation, but to question it. To follow the money, to read between the lines, to know the difference between help and harm. One morning, without announcement, President Traoré returned to the university where students had honored his stand. He stood beneath a painted mural of his likeness and said, "They used to send soldiers. Now they send smiles. But whether it's rifles or roses, we will not be fooled by what they carry. Only by what they leave behind." And what they had left behind this time was a lesson. A moment of collective clarity. A reminder that Africa, long underestimated, was now awake. The betrayal hadn't sparked revenge. It had sparked awareness. Across social media, the story lived on. In small towns, girls once photographed by Claire tore up the prints she had left behind. In classrooms, teachers used her case as a study in sovereignty. And everywhere the phrase remained, written on walls, in profiles, in the hearts of the people. The next one they send will be received the same way, calmly, watched, and unforgiven. Not a threat. A promise. Not made in anger, but in truth. Because this time, Africa didn't shout. It simply saw.